In 2021, a country was born. Its borders were drawn in sand, and its residents gathered together to make their first flag from what else but sand. They wrote down the rules of their country, which included freedom of speech and religion, along with some other pretty important stuff. Canberra isn't really the capital of Australia. There are many more important cities like Sydney or Melbourne, but it's the inland city that acts as the seat of government. But Liberland is different because it doesn't have any sort of administrative center, yet it still works. They also agreed that there would be no president, no prime minister, no capital city, and most importantly, no army. This may sound like the plot of a science fiction movie where everyone lives in a virtual reality, but this is actually all too real. Like how the country was governed, but not others, which sounds like a great idea. Unfortunately, this only works in small groups. When there are a lot of people, it's usually too complicated to organize, just a general vote by the electorate on a particular issue. But we could propose a new one. So in order to start a discussion, you need at least 10 votes. Once enough support is gathered, everyone in the country gets an email asking them to vote yes or no. When the deadline arrives, the votes are counted, and the winner becomes the new flag of the country. So we kept on reading, and soon we found out that this country was in all sunshine and rainbows. For example, there was this guy who was claiming that he was the owner of Liberland, and that everyone else was just a guest in his country. There isn't really a way to deal with people who aren't playing nice. But there are many people who are serious about it. It's a place where they can live according to their own beliefs without fear of persecution. Now, someone could come up with a proposal to kick out spammers, but until that happens, they're free to post whatever they want. So we came up with the design that included a silhouette of a person holding a computer mouse instead of a sword. And then we wrote down the reasons why we think this design would be better. Imagine that you re a teenager in Nebraska who thinks that their hometown is boring and doesn't offer much. Sure, they could move to a bigger city, but why not create their own city? Then we posted our proposal under the existing flag and waited for the results. You can just pick up and move somewhere else without having to go through a bunch of paperwork. Maybe in the future, we'll all have passports that will allow us to travel freely between digital countries. Until then, it's fun to visit places like Liberland to see how people are organizing themselves in new ways. A meeting where everyone participates, which is why larger groups use representatives to vote on their behalf. We found a lot of interesting topics like whether alcohol should be allowed or whether there should be a national sport. We also saw a lot of arguments. People were trying to persuade each other with arguments and examples rather than insulting each other. At the end of the day, the goal of the country is for everyone to live in peace. So it makes sense that the tone of discussions would remain civil, which goes to show that not everyone agrees on everything. But we also saw something else, a sense of community. The problem is that, in order for this to work, the representatives need to be impartial, meaning that they should unhave any interests that might lead them to vote in a way that benefits them at the expense of their electors, which are the basis of the currency. In fact, the entire country runs on a blockchain, which is basically a giant shared spreadsheet. Everyone can access the information in the spreadsheet, and if you own more computers, you have more say in how things are run. But unfortunately, humans aren't always impartial. It's like who picks the next Oasis 4,872 liter? Well, apparently no one. Liberland is a country without a government, without laws, and without anyone to enforce those laws. If someone tried to impose their will on others, they could simply leave the country and go somewhere else. After all, there aren't any border controls in a digital world. So this means that Liberland is a true democracy, at least on paper. The country is called Liberland, and it exists in the digital world, not the physical one. All you need to do is fill out a form online and you're good to go. Because of this, some candidates might try to appeal to a small number of states rather than the whole country. We decided to stay in Liberland for a few days and take part in the democratic process. We started by checking out the Projects tab on the website, which showed us some of the issues being discussed. We had no idea that there were so many topics that needed our attention. So we decided to focus on one of the most important ones, choosing a flag, which means that the president doesn't necessarily represent the whole nation. One reason for this is that the US was built differently than modern nations. Back when it was founded, the country was relatively empty, and there weren't really large groups of people living together in cities. so it was easier to organize meetings where everyone could participate. Once we filled out our application, we received our certificate of citizenship and a message that said, "Welcome to the land of the free. Enjoy your stay." That was nice. There are many countries that don't have capitals. They usually have some kind of administrative center, even if it's just for symbolic purposes. So how does a country without a capital work? What are the advantages and disadvantages of not having one? And can we learn anything from it? We wanted to find out, so we created an account and moved our headquarters to Liberland to see how it works firsthand. Every location has a random name like Oasis 4872 or Canyon 3962. So we decided to go to Oasis 4872, even though there wasn't much of an oasis there. Our new home looked like a desert wasteland, but now it was ours. Our first step was to decide where we should live in Liberland, since there are no cities. So how do you get citizenship in a country that isn't real? It's actually surprisingly straightforward. But how does a country without a capital function? If Liberland were a real country, we'd have to pay taxes to a government that didn't exist. So we went to the town square to figure out what was going on. Here we learned about how the country worked. We got answers to some of our questions. All decisions are made by direct vote of the citizens. The U.S. is a good example of this because the president is elected by the Electoral College. Now back to our story. We knew that we couldn't change the current flag because that would require a referendum. It turns out that our design wasn't really popular. But this gave us a chance to see how the voting system worked. After this, we went to the forum to read about some of the past debates. Sure, there were some trolls and spammers, but overall the tone of the discussions was polite. And while it might be fun to scream at each other on the internet, it's probably best for everyone if we keep things calm. It turns out that the creator of Liberland is just a regular citizen, like everyone else. Although he does have more voting power because he owns more computers. Another problem is that since the country is based on people freely participating, so is this all just a big joke? Bunch of tech geeks pretending to build their own country? Well, perhaps. And it's not just people who live in places with oppressive governments who join Liberland. Some people just want to be a part of something bigger. In Liberland, you don't have to deal with traffic jams, noisy neighbors, or landlords. And if you don't like the decisions that are made, and if you ever feel the urge to become the ruler of your own country, maybe you should start your own Minecraft server.